My aunt sneered across the Thanksgiving table, her voice dripping with condescension. No medals? You're just a POG secretary. I calmly sipped my wine and replied, I don't answer phones. She laughed, waving a hand dismissively. Oh? Then who are you? I looked her dead in the eye and said, Oracle 9. Before she could toss back another insult, her son, a decorated Navy SEAL standing in full dress uniform, went deathly pale. The glass in his hand trembled, spilling onto the tablecloth. He grabbed his mother's arm, his voice barely a whisper, panic written across his face. Mom, stop talking right now. She outranks everyone in this room. The funeral flowers of my youth had long faded, but my family's need to put me in my place remained as fresh as ever. My name is Collins Flynn. I'm 40 years old, and for 18 years, I've quietly served in a career most people couldn't begin to comprehend. It was Thanksgiving evening, and the dining room was packed with relatives admiring my cousin Brandon. At 28, Brandon was the star of the family, a tall, imposing Navy SEAL dressed in his crisp service dress uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons. Aunt Beatrice, his mother, preened beside him like a peacock, making sure every guest acknowledged her son's heroism. Then her eyes landed on me. I was sitting at the edge of the table in a plain charcoal sweater, quietly enjoying a glass of Cabernet. Collins! Beatrice called out, her voice loud enough to slice through the surrounding chatter. It's so nice you could take time off from your little desk job to join us. Must be nice, sitting in an air-conditioned room all day while real soldiers like Brandon are out on the front lines. Brandon looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting his weight, but Beatrice was just getting started. 18 years in the military and not a single deployment story? No medals on display? She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed across the room. Let's be honest, folks. She's just a POG secretary who types up paperwork while the real men do the heavy lifting. The table went quiet for a beat before a few relatives let out uncomfortable chuckles. I didn't flinch. I simply took another slow sip of my wine, looking at my aunt with calm, unbothered eyes as the disrespect hung heavy in the air. Aunt Beatrice leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished wood table, thrilled by the sudden silence she had commanded. Seriously, Collins, she pressed, her lips curling into a smug smirk. We've listened to Brandon talk about his intense training, his tactical deployments, his combat ribbons. But you? 18 years and you've never once mentioned a single operation. No combat stories, no flashy decorations, nothing. She tapped her press-on nails against her wineglass, the high-pitched clinking drawing every remaining eye toward my corner of the table. Why so secretive? Or is it just embarrassing to admit you spend your days filing requisitions and answering phones for actual decision-makers? The relatives leaned in, waiting to see if I would wither under her condescension. I set my glass down on the coaster with a light, precise click. I don't answer phones, Aunt Beatrice, I said, my tone flat, stripped of any emotion. She let out another shrill laugh, waving her hand dismissively in the air. Oh? Is that right? Then who are you supposed to be in this grand military of ours? I looked directly into her eyes, keeping my expression entirely unreadable. Oracle 9. Beatrice blinked, then immediately scoffed, shaking her head as if I'd just spoken nonsense. Oracle 9? She repeated, mockingly testing the phrase on her tongue. What is that? Some ridiculous title they gave you to make an administrative secretary feel important about filing paperwork? She turned to the rest of the family, expecting another chorus of chuckles at my expense. Beatrice was still waiting for the laughter to ripple through the room, but it never came. Instead, the silence grew suffocatingly dense. Standing right beside her, Brandon froze. The smug, relaxed posture of a seasoned Navy SEAL vanished in a fraction of a second. His shoulders squared instantly, his hands locked into fists, and the color drained completely from his face. He didn't just look surprised, he looked terrified. Brandon, sweetie, what's wrong? Beatrice asked, her smug smile finally wavering as she noticed her son's sudden rigid stillness. Look at her, trying to sound like a video game character. "Mom!" Brandon choked out, his voice razor-thin and trembling with a deep, instinctual panic. "Shut your mouth!" Beatrice gasped, shocked by her son's sudden aggression. "Brandon, how dare you?" "I said stop talking," Brandon snapped, turning his wide, panicked eyes toward his mother before locking them back onto me. To anyone else in the room, Oracle 9 sounded like gibberish. But to a SEAL who had spent years operating in high-threat target zones, that call sign was legendary. Oracle 9 wasn't a rank. It was the ultimate strategic overwatch. It was the classified designation for the senior intelligence officer who sat in top-secret underground command centers, holding the power to authorize airstrikes, divert satellite feeds, and dictate live operational protocols for elite special forces teams across the globe. Brandon didn't just recognize the title. He realized that the woman sitting in a plain sweater, quietly sipping wine, held the highest level of clearance in the room. The room remained frozen, suspended in the sudden tension radiating from Brandon. His hand moved fast, grabbing his mother's forearm with enough pressure to make her gasp. "Brandon, what is wrong with you?" Beatrice hissed, trying to pull away, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "You're embarrassing us in front of the whole family over a silly—" "Mom, stop," Brandon commanded, his voice trembling with an authority that stunned the entire table. He swallowed hard, his eyes glued to me as if he were standing before a 3-star general. "You have no idea who you are talking to. You need to apologize right now." Beatrice stared at her son, completely bewildered. "Apologize? To her? She's a secretary." "She is not a secretary." Brandon's voice echoed off the walls, shattering the awkward silence. He stepped around the table, his rigid, disciplined posture giving way to sheer, reverent panic. He turned toward the bewildered family, his hands shaking slightly. 3 years ago, my squad was pinned down in a valley near the border. We were out of ammo, surrounded, and taking heavy fire. The local command refused to send support. They told us we were dead men." He paused, taking a ragged breath, his eyes locking back onto mine. Then over our comms, a voice came through. "Call sign Oracle 9. In less than 4 minutes, she overrode local protocols, redirected 2 drone strikes, and mapped a blind extraction route through an enemy stronghold. She saved 12 lives that night. My life. My team's lives." Brandon turned back to his mother, his face deadly serious. "She doesn't wear medals on her dress uniform, Mom, because the operations she runs don't exist on paper. She outranks everyone in this room." A heavy, stunned quiet settled over the dining room as Brandon's words hung in the air. For 18 years, I had deliberately chosen to operate from the shadows. While others wore polished dress uniforms and displayed rows of colorful medals to earn public respect, my work required absolute anonymity. In my world, if your name ended up in the newspaper or your face appeared on a news broadcast, it meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my Cabernet, letting the silence stretch just long enough for every person at the table to process what they had just heard. "When you spend nearly 2 decades in strategic intelligence," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and carrying an unquestionable weight, "you learn very quickly that real power never needs to shout. It doesn't need applause, and it certainly doesn't require validation at a holiday dinner table." I looked across the room at my relatives, whose smug expressions had completely dissolved into looks of awkward shock and disbelief. "Every medal your son wears on his chest," I continued, looking gently toward Brandon, "was earned through blood, discipline, and extraordinary courage. But the reason he lived to come home and wear them is because officers like me sit in windowless rooms 14 hours a day, watching over every step they take from thousands of miles away." I set my glass back down on the table with a firm, deliberate click. "I don't answer phones, Beatrice. I decide who comes home." Aunt Beatrice stood frozen, her jaw slightly open as the color drained entirely from her face. The arrogant confidence she had carried all evening vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of sheer humiliation. She looked at her son, hoping to find a hint that he was exaggerating, but Brandon's rigid, respectful posture told her everything she needed to know. The silence around the table was suffocating. Every relative who had chuckled at her insults earlier was now looking down at their plates, desperately trying to distance themselves from her behavior. I didn't," Beatrice stammered, her voice stripped of its usual sharp condescension. She fumbled with the napkin in her lap, her hands trembling, visible to everyone. "Collins, I had no idea. You never said anything, so I just assumed." "You assumed what was convenient for your own pride, Mom," Brandon cut in sharply, stepping closer to his mother's chair. His voice was filled with a cold disappointment that hit her harder than any insult could. "You judged her service because she didn't boast about it. You humiliated her in front of our family when she spent her entire life protecting people like me." Beatrice swallowed hard, her eyes finally meeting mine. The woman who had spent the last hour treating me like a second-class citizen now looked small, completely broken by the weight of her own arrogance. "Collins," she whispered, her voice cracking as she forced out the words. "I am so sorry. Please, forgive me." I didn't offer a warm smile, nor did I rush to make her feel comfortable. I simply gave her a single firm nod of acknowledgement, letting her sit in the full weight of her lesson. The dining room remained motionless as I picked up my wineglass one last time, taking a quiet, final sip before setting it down. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. There were no more smug snickers, no more snide comments, and certainly no more attempts to undermine my place in this family. Brandon remained standing at attention, his eyes filled with immense respect as I stood up from my chair and smoothed down my plain charcoal sweater. "True strength never needs to put on a show, Beatrice," I said calmly, looking around the room at the quiet faces of my family. "The work I do isn't about accolades or recognition. It's about ensuring that the people who step onto the front lines make it back home to the families who love them." I offered Brandon a brief, respectful nod, which he returned with a sharp, disciplined salute. Without another word, I picked up my handbag and walked toward the front door, leaving a room full of relatives who would never look at a desk job the same way again. Silence can be the most powerful weapon in any room, but knowing when to speak your truth is what ultimately changes everything. What would you have done if you were sitting in my seat that night? Have you ever had your hard work completely dismissed by the people closest to you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to mention what city you are watching from so I can see how far our story has reached. Thank you for listening, and until next time, take care.